who just or not, because it is in nature to stretch our hands out toward the nation of one's needs that cannot be satisfied by anything material, but are met in the faith professed by the believer. While we have many needs like food, shelter, purpose, companionship, and probably Wi-Fi, perhaps our most basic need is one that is hardwired in us, and that is to know God. I mean, Augustine famously said, he said these words, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you." A strange sense of discontentment is what we experience in a God-haunted world, and yet that disappears when we connect with God just as we were made to. There are several facets of our faith for us to consider along these lines of faith. First, faith entails believing certain facts. The Apostles' Creed calls us to express faith in the faith. This faith consists of assertions made in the creed about who God is, who Jesus is, the meaning of salvation. Now, this type of faith is a noun. It is the sum of what we might call faith facts that tell us something about God's person and his work. The deposit of faith facts that are embedded in the creed is based on the apostles' testimony to Jesus. And the apostolic testimony is really the story of God sending the eternal word into the world and how he brings life to all who receive it. The creed then describes the gist of this apostolic testimony as to what God has done in Jesus Christ. So the Apostles' Creed calls us to believe the faith facts which embody the apostolic testimony to Jesus. This can be summed up along the lines of Paul's own exhortation to Timothy, that he would continue to be nourished on the truths of the faith and of the good teaching that you have followed. You see, we hold to that kind of faith. That's what we confess in the Apostles' Creed. Second, faith is not only a noun, but it's also a verb. It's an action. While the faith can refer to a body of teachings to be assented to, the act of faith is certainly more than that. The biblical picture of faith is no stale affirmation of stationary facts. Rather, belief is something that is living, active, dynamic, personal, even a little bit risky at times. A good definition of faith comes from the book of Hebrews, where the author says, "Faith is confidence in what we hope for and an assurance about what we do not see." You see, faith is a firm conviction that what we hope for will one day happen. Faith is confidence about a future that looks uncertain to others. To have faith means that we believe that God is there, God is with us, and God is for us. And God offers us a world beyond our own that we can scarcely even imagine. Ultimately, faith is our trusting response to God's own faithfulness. I love how the Swiss theologian Karl Barth put it. He said, faith is trust in the divine faithfulness. Our faith is orientated towards the God who has shown that he is faithful to his people. When our faith fails or flounders, our God remains faithful to us. Faith is ultimately our trusting response to what God has done for us and promised us in the gospel, which in turn pervades every aspect of our daily lives. Faith is not an abstract virtue. It's directed towards a person, Jesus Christ. Faith is our cleaving and clinging to Christ. Faith is the act where we say to Christ, using the words of Psalm 119, "Save me, for I am yours." Third, faith and obedience go naturally together. Now, if we collapse faith into mere obedience, the result would not be faith, but more like fealty and fear. A belief that we must obey certain rules and live in a certain way to earn God's love. If we only have law or rules to obey apart from God's sense of love for us, we would find ourselves in some kind of, performance treadmill, constantly striving and trying to impress God or impress others by our own acute religiosity. Alternatively, if we cordon off faith from obedience too far, then faith becomes dislocated from faithfulness. And we run the risk that faith is nothing more than an abstract compilation of religious ideas that doesn't particularly influence the way that anyone lives. You see, a faith without obedience will seek spiritual transcendence without moral transformation. That kind of faith, James says, is, dead. The fact is that real faith always expresses itself in action. What we truly believe is exhibited in how we live. That's what the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard said. He said, "As you have lived, so you have believed." As Christians, we have to make sure that our walk matches our talk and that we live lives worthy of the gospel. We are not called to be fans of Jesus, but followers of Jesus. The great 19th century Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon, he put it wonderfully and memorably. He said this, he said, "We preach the obedience of faith. Faith is the fountain, the foundation, and the fosterer of obedience. Men obey not God until they believe in him, and we preach faith in order that men may be brought to obedience." I think Spurgeon was right there. So while faith is not the same as obedience, there can be no true and enduring faith without obedience. Such obedience is not driven by fear, but born of love, and always translates itself into action. This is what the Apostle John wrote in one of his letters. He said, "And this is love, that we walk in obedience to his commands." Fourth, what about faith and reason? Well, there's been a long industry in Christian thought of arguing that faith is indeed quite reasonable. Indeed, there are some very good reasons for believing of God if you ever care to look them up. I mean, the existence of a God explains why there is a something rather than a nothing, why the universe is rationally intelligible, and why it seems wired up to produce intelligent and sentient life. The existence of God accounts for our sense of moral oughtness, the belief that we ought to act and behave in certain ways towards other human beings, that all human beings possess a sense of right and wrong. The existence of God also makes sense of the religious experience of many peoples. God's existence is perhaps most fully revealed in the historical events of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. That said, while faith has its reasons, reason I don't think is ever really the cause of faith. No one is properly argued into faith. Rather, faith is what emerges from an encounter with the living God. Fifth, faith and doubt are serious issues, and we have to approach them with a bit of sensitivity. And there can be seasons of life where God feels distant. Times when we feel like our prayers are just bouncing off the ceiling, Now, the Bible is realistic about that. It's realistic about doubt. In the Gospel of Mark, there's a very famous scene where a man begs Jesus to heal his son who suffers from convulsions, and petitioning Jesus to help him if he can. And Jesus, desperately responds, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." This man believed that Jesus' miraculous healing powers were possible, but no more than that. He needed help to move beyond mere possibility to come to a point of absolute trust. And then there's the famous story, of course, of the disciple Thomas, who heard from the other disciples that Jesus was risen, but he replied, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Thomas was your quintessential rationalist or skeptic. Dead people don't come back to life. Thomas knew that. Now, maybe Jesus went to heaven, maybe he became an angel, maybe his spirit went to the bosom of Abraham, but daily experience told Thomas that dead people generally stay dead. How embarrassing and yet how enthralling it must have been for the risen Jesus to tell Thomas, "Stop doubting and believe." Then, in the Epistle of Jude, we have another example about doubt. We're told to be merciful to those who doubt. You see, when churches argue bitterly amongst themselves, as was happening in the church that Jude was writing to, it seems some people were left confused about what they believed and perhaps even wondering if they really believe. To such persons, Jude urges us to show understanding, patience, and mercy. Many people will wonder about the intellectual credibility of their faith. After all, belief in rivers turning to blood, floating axe heads, and virgins having babies is going to be a big pill to swallow for those of us living in the age of electricity and the internet and iPads. Or else, circumstances in our lives may lead us to wonder whether God even cares. If you have not experienced moments like those, I assure you that at some point you or someone you care about probably will. Yet doubt is not always a bad thing. Doubt can be a sign of spiritual struggle, a means of growing into maturity, a pathway into a stronger and more resilient faith. What sustains me in times of doubt is one simple thing, and that's the complete and utter worshipability of Jesus Christ. Jesus is magnetic. I'm drawn towards him, not just to hear about him, but to worship him. Once when Jesus gave a difficult sermon about what it meant to believe in him, it was probably more of a talk or a discourse, many of his disciples turned away and no longer followed him. Jesus asked Peter if he too wanted to leave. And Peter's answer was very simple. "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and know that you are the Holy One of God." For me, it's not that Jesus is the only religious game in town. He's not. There's atheism, Buddhism, Islam, and they've all got their own attractions. The issue is that his story is the only story worth believing in. I believe in Jesus because I'm moved in my heart to believe that he is who he said he is, the Son of God, the Son of Man. And yet I also know that believing in him makes me a better person. Now, don't get me wrong, I have not achieved perfection or purity, but following Jesus makes me more like him. Compassionate, faithful, merciful. Compared to Jesus, everything in the world smells like dung and tastes like expired tuna. That's the best way to put it. 6, faith needs to leave room for mystery. The fun thing about mystery novels is there's always some sort of strange puzzle or perilous situation that will eventually get solved by the hero, but we enjoy the surprise of discovering precisely how. That's why I love Agatha Christie novels. Now, on the one hand, Christians believe that God's mysterious purposes have been made known to them in the unveiling of Christ. In fact, the whole book of Revelation is about the divine disclosure of God's plan to put the world to rights. So we know how the story is going to end. It's going to end with a new heavens and a new earth, with God's redeemed people rejoicing in it and reigning over it. But on the other hand, there are still so many uncertainties and unknowns. I mean, what does tomorrow hold for me? I mean, what has God planned for my life or my family or my church? What is my part in God's designs? What foes will emerge? What trials will we face? What failures will we experience? How's God going to bring us all through it? Every day we wake and we walk upon this world, and it's another page in the great mystery of God's plan and purposes. Every day is another step into the journey towards the New Jerusalem. Every day is another improvised performance by the church, the company of the gospel, who perform what their part in the divine drama. Every day is another day of delighting in the mystery of the unknown. I mean, faith means following Jesus really into the mystery of God. Faith is filled with a curiosity that longs to be satisfied, and faith compels us to imagine something we could scarcely comprehend. Faith emerges from that sneaking suspicion that everything is not always as it appears to be. Faith arises from that gnawing doubt that reality goes deeper than it looks. Faith is knowing that I see and sense something beyond myself that draws me closer and that won't let me go. Faith is born out of a mysterious curiosity that is singularly dissatisfied with answers that leave no room for the transcendent. Faith, we might say, is what happens when something stirs in the quietness of our own soul, so that suspicion gives way to conviction, and mystery